Hello and welcome back to the All for Women's Football podcast. We are delighted to join you on another Monday night and get stuck in to a discussion all about women's football culture. It's been a hot topic recently and we're going to do a deep dive into what we like about it, what we don't like about it, what we want to see going forward, what we don't want to see going forward, and everything surrounding it. And we're going to touch on the new documentary that's come out about the Spanish women's football team as well at some point. So of course, we want to be hearing your opinions throughout the show, but without further ado, let's get into it. Yes, hello. How are we all? It's good to be back in the hosting seat after a away evening to everyone that's in the chat. Nice to hear from you all. I'm not going to put all the comments up, but plenty of chat going on there, and hopefully we'll continue that throughout the show. Beth, how are you on this fine evening?
Hello, yes, I am very good, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, not bad, thank you. I'm still in my little cold house that needs this big coat, so it's going to be a regular feature, I feel, through the winter months. Julia, how are you?
Doing fine. It's a tough week to be a stressful week to be an American. I won't talk about that though. But it was snowing in Minnesota last week, so at least it's not as cold here. So I'm doing well.
I can't really complain on the cold front there, I have to say. But yeah, we'll certainly keep an eye out. Tomorrow night, I feel like there might be a bigger show going on than even this one. So very scary and interesting in equal measures, potentially. Barry, how are you?
I am much better now. I'm in the presence of people who are cultured, well refined, and have a clue what's going on in the world, just in general. It's a wonderful thing to be here, and I cannot wait to see what delights you're going to throw at me today for me to try and respond to. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I'm good. I'm not bad at all. I've had a pretty not productive day, but I'm glad to be on the show to feel a bit more productive about everything. So yeah, not bad. First, most important question of the show. I'd like the answer to this. Not sure.
I was just trying to answer this, but my chat wasn't working. Super important question. It's next to the cheese state. Wisconsin would be the cheese state. We border it. So sorry to disappoint.
Yes, that's slightly disappointing. I would like a cheese state, but at least you're nearby.
I genuinely would have thought Philadelphia would have been the cheese state.
It's the cream cheese state.
Yeah, cheese steak and cheese state are confusing, but
yeah,
no.
But also Philadelphia is a spreadable cheese over here as well, so it works on.
Yeah. No.
Hey ho.
So,
kicking off with disappointments.
We kicked off with the in-depth discussion there and on the important issues. Now we'll get stuck into women's football culture. I guess I want to start us off with just what do we like about women's football culture at the moment? Why do we go to games? What are we enjoying about it? And like just the positives to start off with about kind of personal experience of women's football and what we like about it. Beth, we'll start with you.
Yeah, of course. So I think as a girl who grew up kind of in a family very big on men's football, for me, something I like about women's football culture is how different it is in the sense of, and I don't want to play into the whole like, oh, it needs to be family friendly. That's not at all what I'm saying, but it feels safer as a girl, as a queer woman. It's somewhere the majority of the time it does feel safe to be. I don't feel like if I turn and give my partner a hug, I'm about to get hate crimed. Whereas at a men's game, it does feel like that. And that's something that I don't, in my experience anyway, like that feeling hasn't changed over like 10 years. For me, that has not changed. The concern hasn't got any less. Whereas at a women's game, that like is not something that really even crosses my mind. So I think that's really important. From like a cultural perspective, it's less kind of hostile in like a harmful way. I think the hostility that men's football breeds can be really dangerous. Like the prevalence of like racism, sexism, homophobia, everything is still really, really high in men's football, and women's football absolutely does harbour a lot of those issues too, as I'm sure that's something we'll talk about. But for me, it does feel like a very different, less threatening environment to be in than, say, a Premier League stadium, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Julia, you kind of sharing similar thoughts on that? What draws you to women's football, I guess?
Yeah, I guess it's a little bit different for me just because, I mean, again, Minnesota, we didn't have a men's professional. I mean, we don't have a women's professional team either, but the US women's national team is so much more ingrained in the culture and was when I was growing up. Like, so the first football games I actually went to that were professional were women's games. And I didn't go to my first men's game until I came here visiting my sister when I was 13. So a little bit different just kind of culture wise. And so what I'm used to, like obviously we have a lot of our issues in US soccer as well, but probably a little bit different just because it feels I don't know, a little bit more normalized to go to the women's team rather than the men's team.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I think it's not like, I feel like here it's very normalized just to be a men's football fan and then women's second. I think because my experience was going to a men's football match first, but it was non-league. So my first professional match was technically, well, it probably wasn't even professional then, but it was a women's match at the top flight. But I don't think they were professional because it's 2007. But yeah, so, but that felt like weird here. Whereas it's interesting that there it's kind of, it's maybe more normal for you to go and see the US women's national team and that be embedded at that time. Yeah, no. And Barry, how about you? Obviously, probably again a different perspective. What have you really enjoyed since starting to watch women's football and the culture there?
Well, I mean, it's clearly not a girl. So in that respect, it's obviously a very different sort of approach because in a lot of ways, I'm very privileged. There's lots of things that I just take for granted in terms of going to the football and just being able to enjoy myself in general. That, if I'm brutally honest, I never considered. Through all of my time going to watch football as a younger man, and whether that be Stevenage, whether that be Man United, whether that be whoever, I've never felt worried. You still feel that camaraderie, and it was a very, very different world for me back then. You know, the way in which football is consumed here, you do find yourself getting drawn into the collective, and it's a very, very different situation. But I think when you get into the women's game, it's so different, and I love it because it's so different. Football for me was just, I'm all about the competition. I just want to see good teams going up against other good teams. And ideally, I want my team to be the best team so that I enjoy it a lot more. That's the general gist of what you want to be as a football fan. And I like the fact that when you start talking about women's football, we're in a situation where we're starting to get competitiveness in there. You know, by that, I mean the rivalries amongst the fans. You know, you don't want it all just to be, oh, hello, old chap, how are you? Everything's great. Let's all shake hands. You do that after the game. But during the game, absolutely, we should hate each other because it's your team against my team. Listen, there's no doubts about it. This weekend, Laura and I are very much on different sides of the supporting peninsula. But it didn't take us long to be back here together again as friends, because for that 90 minutes, just like it should be on the pitch. And, you know, you for those 90 minutes, you're against them. But beyond that, you're not. I actually turned around to one of our players the other day on the bench, and she was talking about women's football in general. And I just said, I actually prefer it more than the men's. I've hit a point where I just, despise is the wrong word, but I really find it distasteful, men's football now. There is so much money in the game. It's not about the game anymore. It's all about when's it going to be played. It's got to be played at a time that's best for the television companies, not the time that's best for the fans. Everything is about money. Even whether you keep your manager or not is based on whether you're in the top four, whether you're this, that, or it's just absolutely horrific, and it takes all the fun and all the joy out of it, because football is about the people. It's always been about the people. It's a working class sport, and it's been catapulting everybody into multimillionaires, and it's the one reason why I fear for the women's game, because I don't want them to be so inflated with money that it just gets overtaken. And that's not because I don't want women to be rich. I do want women to be rich, but you can still be rich playing football compared to other people. Like, when you are earning more money in one football match than people are earning in a year, that's wrong. It's like, there's too much money, and the greed that they don't even want to put that on the women's game. So that doesn't really tell you what I enjoy, other than it's just so much better than the other code. And if I could push a nuclear button that would get rid of a sport, it would actually be men's football, because it needs to restart. It needs to go back. And that's what women's football is. It's just the joy of actual football being competitive against each other. It's, dare I say it, it's the working person sport, because you just get to enjoy it. That's what I love about it. It's bloody brilliant.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's plenty of agreement in the chat as well. Alan's given up going to men's football and just enjoys women's football more. I think Catherine raises a good point as well, that being able to go to women's football on your own, like, it's so much, I feel so much more comfortable doing that than haven't been to a men's match on my own, and I don't think I'd want to, but I've been to so many. Julia,
I just recently went to my first men's football match on my own, and it was one of those things, like, not that all men are man spreading, but I was like sitting in between these groups of lads that were like talking over me because they didn't know each other, but they were also spreading their legs out and yelling at me. It felt like it, and like they seemed to question why I was there. Yeah, it was uncomfortable, and I don't think I'll be doing that again in the future.
Yeah, no, it does feel.
Dad, like, who are these people to think that you don't want to go because that's somebody else's behaviour that's making you feel like you don't want to go there?
Yeah, and it's also just like the physical space. It's the looks, the physical space of like encroaching into my area, making me feel even more like, hey, you shouldn't be there. I mean, nothing terrible happened. It was just one of those situations where I think I'll hold off on doing that again for a while.
And this is what I mean. This is what I'm saying about me as a bloke feeling quite, because I've never felt that. And I would like to think that I've never made anybody feel like that in terms of being around them. But I think there's too much. It's too much of a laddie, blokey sort of situation. And it's just not needed, because we're all just there to talk about football, and that's the issue. That's why you've got these people that are, like getting under Joey Barton's umbrella, because they're just too much on the wrong side of everything. Anyway, I've taken over your show, Laura. Sorry, shut me up. Push the mute button.
No, I'm enjoying it. I'm enjoying the discussion. Sean has also made a point that potentially international football compared to domestic football, and I'm sure we'll also get onto this kind of point about potentially going down a slippery slope with Nikki Deesa and co. So yeah, I'll move us on here. There's plenty of different opinions in the chat though that are all completely valid, and I guess it depends what those experiences are in terms of whether you've attended matches or not. But overall consensus is that everyone kind of enjoys the atmosphere of women's football. I guess we'll dig into the current issue of why we're talking about this right now, and I think it came up a lot in various discourses around women's football that there were some people were calling out toxicity around, I guess, specifically the sacking of Jonas Eidevall and the pressure leading up to that. I think Mane Zinsberger, the Arsenal goalkeeper, put out a post on LinkedIn kind of saying like, we're human, etc., etc. But then there's obviously been a response to that, calling it out for being potentially infantilizing and kind of policing almost this like need to be feminine in the crowd. So, and I think there's lots of different and valid points probably amongst both sides when you kind of begin to pick them out, which is what we're going to try and do over the course of this show, and various different ways of looking at this. But I think to start us off, we'll go into just like a general overview of how each of us kind of took that response as it was occurring before we got all this discourse, like whether it actually stood out to us or whether it just felt normal. The kind of discourse around Jonas Eidevall, it's happened before with Mark Skinner, of course, with Skinner out signs. So very kind of topical, but also just something that's a part of the game. So did it actually stand out to anyone as feeling like it went too far, or did it just kind of feel normal when it was happening until this kind of discourse came about afterwards? Beth, what was your kind of experience of that, I guess?
Yeah, to me, it honestly felt very normal. This is what happens in football. When a team is underperforming, a manager is under scrutiny, we see them kind of criticized. We see calls for them to be sacked, to move on, etc. So I didn't personally see anything that I felt crossed a line. I'm not saying there wasn't anything that crossed the line, but in my experience, I didn't come across anything. So I was quite surprised when it then turned into a conversation about kind of being toxic, and because obviously sending anyone any sort of abuse is never okay, regardless of whether it's a manager or a player. That's not something that as a society we should be encouraging or accepting, of course, but nothing that I personally saw, and again, that's not to say it didn't happen, but with your inside of, for example, anything that I saw was very much fans saying, I don't think this manager is right for this club anymore. I think something needs to change. Of course, maybe sometimes it's worded slightly more harshly than that, but that's football. That's the way it is. And I think, again, as long as it's not veering into that territory of becoming kind of like derogatory, abusive, whatever you want to call it, I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And that's why we have fans in football. Like, what the fans think and what the fans say is so important. Such a massive part of football culture. So I didn't personally see an issue with the shouts for Eidevall to be sacked. I didn't see an issue with the shouts for Skinner to be sacked last season. I think that it's a part of the game. And I think to kind of imply that everything needs to be gentle and lovely is to kind of infantilize the women's game, and does also veer into kind of like toxic positivity in a sense, because everything isn't always going to be perfect. Teams lose, managers get sacked. It happens. It's part of the game. So yeah, I think that to say that everybody needs to just be like smiling and thankful all the time is not at all constructive for the game in general or for the growth of the women's game.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think a lot of people are agreeing in the comments as well. I guess, Julia, do you, agree with that overall? And do you think maybe there's like a almost hypersensitivity in women's football to comments like this?
Yeah, definitely agree with most of what Beth was saying. I think the only thing is I wasn't really surprised by the pushback, because I do think there's almost this hypersensitivity. We don't want to make the mistakes that men's football has made, which fair enough, we don't want to, but part of the growth of the game is kind of finding the footing and what we want as a football culture, which I know is the whole point of this discussion. But so yeah, I definitely agree with Beth that I most of what I was seeing, I wasn't personally offended by, or I don't think that it was crossing a line into abuse. Obviously, I'm not Mark Skinner or Jonas Eidevall, but it's kind of part of the game, and I think it's fair play to ask for your team to be doing better. Like, that's what we want, and the fact that we're even having this discussion means that we're moving in the right direction, because people are engaging and having these discussions of, okay, what are the expectations? As a football fan, how are we going to keep growing? And I think asking for your team and your owners to do better is a positive thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, Anton said basically exactly the same thing. And Sean's highlighted the fact that the narrative around women's football maybe has to change and move on from this kind of nicey and something to keep, I guess, the fans that are established around. I guess it's potentially interesting, Barry. Do you see actually, obviously, removing any abuse that did occur and as maybe something to do with social media? Do you see what's happening around kind of women's football with this more engagement in Jonas out and Skinner out and what's going on the pitch actually maybe is more of a positive, as like a development of fan culture that can be quite a good thing?
I think it really depends on the person, and this is the problem. Like, when you start looking at women's football, the one thing that you should absolutely be able to say about women's football is the inclusivity that it already has, just radiating out of its very self. Like, men's football is still sitting there celebrating the fact that there is one person that has come out as being gay. Over here in women's football, it doesn't matter. It's not even really a question. You're not sitting there wondering whether or not this person's gay, whether this person's straight. It's not a question. Who cares? It's like, it's not even a talking point. They're not fussed. You had Leah Williamson the other day on some TV show or on TikTok. No, who is it with? Oh, it was on the radio or something. But either way, she's talking about how they're just throwing tampons around, basically. And, you know, she's riding them up her sleeve. And she's opening up the discourse around things that traditionally some people might look at as being taboo. And it's perfect. That's what women's football is. And this is where the problem is going to come in, because women's football has been, especially around England, and this is where we're talking about really, because elsewhere, women's football seems to have different problems through different cultures. Looking at it through the lens of the WSL, because that's really the only area that I can do so. I've not been around the other leagues enough to do that. Looking at the WSL and the way that that's gone, and you've only got to look at the evolution of the leagues over the last 20 years and how it has grown. It was such a tiny game. It wasn't seen by many people. As I said myself, I was not really paying attention to women's football prior to 2018. I just wasn't. It wasn't in my sphere, because I was totally fixated on Manchester United men. That was it. That was all I was doing. That's my football club. That's who I love. That's why I want the wallpaper. I want Eric Cantona. That's why he's behind me. I want Ruud van Nistelrooy up on the wall. I want to go back to the treble 99 winner. That was me. That was football. I didn't have time to worry about any other countries, any other leagues, anything like that. All I cared about was my football team. And when Manchester United women came about, all of a sudden I'm like, well, that's Manchester United. I'm going to have a little look at this and see what's going on. So I got MUTV and I watched it for a year. I'm like, this is great. I love it. This is superb. And they've just won something. That's even better. You know, I haven't done that for a while. Oh, I'm going to go and watch it. And so I did. I went off to Leicester and I watched the game. I took a mate with me and it was great. And all of these things, not the Bret Hart one today, Michael, it's a more serious show. But genuinely, all of those things building into it was superb. The problem is that if you want it to grow, and people do want it to grow, you're going to have to accept that it's not going to be everybody that agrees with you. Because the minute you open it up to a wider spectrum of people, different personalities, all of those things are going to come through. So you are going to get people who are going to be more antagonistic towards managers and want them to be held to account. You are going to get people that are very, very supportive over the clubs, regardless of what's going on. All of these different people are very much going to be around and involved in the game. You've only got to look at the discourse around women's football at the moment. Should people be asking for pictures and wanting things to be signed? Should they not? Is it all right to support a player rather than supporting the football team? This is the problem that we've got. This is what we're facing now. There are so many different views. It's a melting pot. And who are we to decide which ones are correct and which ones are not? And that's going to be the tricky part, because it's very easy, I think, to sit there and say, this is how I think it should look. But actually, it's about, what does women's football want? How does it want to grow? And what does it want to do? And I think that is the more pertinent part of it. How do you take all of those opinions and still come up with a product that remains quintessentially the women's football that we all know and love, that's inclusive to everybody? Or are we just saying that actually women's football's only going to be accessible if you are ticking these particular boxes? It's not easy, I don't think.
Yeah, no, definitely. I've got some questions, and I think we'll come on to that a little bit as well, in terms of like digging into where, I guess, how we want it to go, or how we maybe do try and tackle some of those problems. I just want to come back to some of the comments touching on kind of social media aspects. Michael saying here, social media ruining men's football. And obviously that, I think social media simultaneously is like a really key part of women's football, with meme accounts and things that are actually really funny and a nice added part. And I think Flo Lloyd-Hughes did an article recently with Goal and Mundial that was really good on this. That I think she pointed out that kind of there's social media has become quite toxic, but it's toxic everywhere. And so if you talk about toxicity in women's football, it's kind of not just in women's football, it's everywhere. And obviously social media can be toxic, but it doesn't mean that women's football has become toxic. It just means that social media can be quite toxic. But then there's also, as people have pointed out, women's football having utilised it really nicely, and it can be a really kind of good place for that culture to grow as well, with women's football kind of coming about at a time where social media is a really key part of people's lives now. I think also my opinion on this in terms of like the backlash, I guess, that came about as a result of talk about this culture is the kind of feminization of like this enforced making women's football be kind of feminine enough. And I think there's an aspect to society that doesn't want it to become like men's football, because it's almost like protecting this male space and not wanting like women's football to encroach on that in a sense, which would be my opinion. I'm going to move on quickly, but if anyone wants to kind of add to that in terms of just why we think there has been this backlash, if anyone has anything to add, it's absolutely fine if not. But I've raised that point and put it out there. And yeah, obviously, if you kind of agree with that in the comments as well, feel free. But I think there is this kind of, I think it happens in any kind of feminist movement throughout history. You can kind of see this, where there's always a backlash when women kind of overstep the line of what femininity is kind of traditionally seen as in society. I think that feeds in a little bit to what's happening here. But yeah, I think it's really important to kind of look about going forward, because as Barry mentioned, we've seen this idea that you're not allowed to take selfies at matches anymore. And we want it to be inclusive, but there's other sections that want it to be more like men's football in some aspects of it. Beth, do you have any worries that some people see the end point of kind of what fan culture is as men's football, as that being the model for it? Or do you think actually women's football is on its own path, but there is kind of just this balance to be had?
I think it often feels like there's kind of one extreme or the other. There's people who think that women's football needs to kind of cater almost exclusively to young girls. But then there's other people who think, no, it should just mirror the men's game. And I think the ultimate goal does need to strike a balance between the two, because we don't want to take all of the problems that the men's game has and seems to not be at all resolving into the women's game. But we also don't want to kind of like isolate it to one really specific demographic, which that whole idea to me, I think, is just kind of like rooted in stereotypes about what femininity is and should be, and who should be allowed to access certain things in certain communities. So I think that it's perfectly fine for women's football to remain kind of quite a large degree of separation from the men's game. Because, and the reason I think that is because I think that men's football has, as someone said in the comments, literally become almost like the poster child for social issues, in kind of the worst way possible. But I also do think that we need to allow like a freedom of expression almost when it comes to women's football. Like, criticism is a part of sport. And I know kind of with social media, it can become like a bit of a witch hunt or a pile on whenever anything happens, and no kind of one individual should ever be the target of that. But as you mentioned before, that is kind of like a much wider issue that does not just apply to women's football or even football as a whole. It applies to everything. So that's a whole separate issue that does need to somehow be hopefully worked on, but God knows how we do that. But yeah, I think it's really important to find a balance, really. And I know that that's a lot easier said than done. And I don't think the way of doing that is by kind of infantilizing women's sport and women's football. I think it's important to allow it to go on this journey. But yeah, for me, I don't think that it is. I don't think it really is mirroring the men's game, and I don't think it should. I don't think it will. However, I think it's also naive to think that these issues only exist in the men's game. It might kind of present in different ways in the women's game, but it's important to remember that even when it comes to clubs, the WSL now, every club is managed by a Premier League side. So I think it would be naive to think that a lot of those issues don't kind of run across the board. So yeah, there's lots of work to be done on all fronts, but I think that it doesn't have to go one extreme or the other, basically. I think it's important to consider the bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's like kind of what you touched on in terms of getting this balance, because there's a lot of discourse around moving away from this family-friendly culture, etc. But I do think there's an argument to be had maybe for, like, for me as a fan personally, I'd obviously want it to be more like separate ends for different fans, and I think that's something that's really positive. I'm more than happy to kind of have a potentially more tribal, more, I guess, I don't know how exactly to describe it, but to move away from this family-friendly idea. But on Barry's point as well, I do think there is a need to keep the funds that have been gained in women's football, like, enfranchised with the sport. Julia, I was just wondering, like, we've obviously had these kind of restrictions, like no selfies, but keeping aspects of them with things like Autograph Alley, I think it's Man City's doing, and various different like things that are going on. Do you think it's still like super important to keep those fans engaged and not just like, I guess, not kind of I've lost the word, but like make it exclusive to fans that maybe do just want to support, like just say they're a Viviana Miedemar fan and that's it. Like, we still got to allow for those fans to be in the game, right?
Yeah, and I think by alienating different sectors, so whether you think that the game should be completely family friendly, or you think they should be in a separate section, or you think there should be an autograph alley or not, like, there's really, you can't go all one way or the other, because the whole point is we still want to grow the game. We still want to be having intellectual conversations be able to have conversations about the football we're seeing with more people. Okay, so you can't do that by alienating people, but I think it's also naive and I can't think of the word I'm looking for, but like, it's not our right to have such close access to the players because they are humans and they're not just like, I don't know, pieces of property for the fans or for the teams that we support. So guess what? They get angry and they have terrible games. So if they are not in the mood to talk to a kid and sign an autograph, then they should be able to walk away and not have to face criticism for that. Yeah, I think, and I know Beth talked about this a lot, like, there's just no, it can't be one way or the other. It's not black and white, just like everything in life. And so there has to be a way to, keep criticism away from turning personal and like the toxic trash that is on social media. There has to be some way to kind of try to keep that out of the game while still understanding that there have to be boundaries between players and their needs and growing the game. I know that doesn't really answer anything. That I guess that all of that to say is I don't know, and there has to be some balance. I just don't know what that balance is.
Yeah, I've realised I've created like questions where it's like, answer this huge question that no one's been able to answer in women's football for like years in terms of getting balance. But no, it's a really good point, because I think we often, like, it's often forgotten the kind of player perspective in this debate, where it's like, well, they are just humans that don't need to be kind of harassed all the time by like needy fans. And I think that's something that absolutely does need to go.
Sorry, I just was thinking about the fact that I don't know if like in the US for certain sports, like I know in baseball, Sundays tend to be like family days so that your kids are allowed to go on the field and like run the bases and meet the players. So obviously football doesn't have games every day to have the same sort of access, but something like that where you have like a very specific a themed night where that is family night, and you have more access to the players than what you would normally have, so that it makes it a little bit easier for the players mentally, but also, and it keeps the football culture that is so great. You can get to know these players. If you're just a fan of Viv Miedema, you can have a greater access to her, but you're understanding this is their job, and they're not just going to constantly be available at your beck and call.
I thought I was muted and I muted myself instead of unmuting myself. So that went well. But yeah, no, I completely agree. And it's really interesting that maybe it is like looking outside of the sport to take ideas from other sports and other ways of doing it to kind of answer these questions. I guess, Barry, there must be like parts of men's football, and I think Sean speaks about it here in terms of wanting derbies, wanting rivalry, wanting passion, and making sure that this interest is still kept up. What elements, and maybe we already have them in the women's game, maybe not, but are there elements of men's football that you'd maybe like to see a bit more of in the women's game? Or is it just like, I feel like it's maybe a little bit of a forced question, but is it just kind of seeing it as itself?
I wouldn't say it's a forced question. I'd say it's an unanswerable question so far as everybody's searching for the Holy Grail. The problem is the Holy Grail is whatever's in your head. Like, I could come out now with a perfectly articulate way of which I think women's football should go down. And there'll be some people in the chat who go, oh, he's amazing. He get rid of this person in charge and stick him in because he'll be superb. And there'll be another section of people who'll be sat there going, where'd they get this clown? He's got no idea what's he talking about. And this is the problem. We are massively searching for the lost city of Atlantis, believing that it still exists somewhere. And actually, it doesn't. This, I think, I'll just nail it down now for you all. Everyone who's hoping that there's going to be this zenith of perfect women's football, that by the time we get to it, where everybody's on equal pay and the world's wonderful, and that all of the fans are wonderfully well behaved, only chanting at exactly the right times, and never upsetting. And it's never going to happen in a million years, because we live in a world where the vast majority of people are lovely, but there is unfortunately a group of people in everyday life who will just ruin your day, purely because they have no people skills and they're selfish and they don't care. Listen, people are talking about toxicity. You need to actually get down to what toxicity is. It's effective, apart from being poisonous, which it isn't. It needs to be either very harmful or very unpleasant in a pervasive way. So to be pervasive, it means it's got to spread across and really take root. And there's the problem, because everybody wants it to grow. And I said this earlier on, that means you are going to get more and more people. They are going to have different ideas of football to you. Like, it's funny, I'm watching the chat, and listen, you are totally entitled to your opinion. So don't take any notice of what this 42-year-old fat bloke from England is saying. If you want to do it your way, do it your way. Like, I will sleep tonight, whatever's going on. But the amount of people that are having a go, look, I'm a football fan. Like a proper one. This has been my only sport that I've cared about for my entire life. I tried learning American football. I like it. I watch it. I'm a Tampa Bay Bucks fan, but I'm never going to know enough about that sport to be able to hold down a conversation with anybody. You can say that about any other sport. I'm pretty good at them, but football's my one. It's my one true love, as Justin Bieber once said. And it was my first love, baby. So it was an amazing thing. I don't understand people who are loving this player more than a football. I don't understand them. I have no idea what they're doing with their life, and I feel like the choices they're making in their life are questionable. But I also don't understand Taylor Swift fans, like the bracelet things. But I would challenge anybody to sit there and find a tweet from me or a sentence from me that has ever had a go at these people. Because if that's how they want to live their life, who are they hurting? Like, if they are so, let's say that we was talking about this panel and I decided that I didn't really like the channel, but I was just going to follow Beth everywhere she went. Now, that sounds weird. Now, there are certain people that are going to be able to do that. There are people that will travel to different countries just to go and watch a player who was their favourite player. I think that's odd. But as long as they're not crossing any lines and they're not doing anything that's nefarious and they're not, you know, effectively stalking someone, don't worry about it. Like, how's it affecting your life? But why are you getting yourself so upset over the fact that Beth is so incredibly besotted by Viv Miedema that she'll follow her everywhere and that she now doesn't care about Arsenal because she wants to go and see? Who cares? Like, why are you letting that be the thing that you fixate on? Equally the same with the family-friendly atmosphere. Like, is it really the world's worst thing that people are asking you to maybe not swear in a chant so that kids can be involved in it as well? My earliest memory was telling the referee what he was. And my mum was sat next to me and she looked at me and she went, "You can't say that, you're 11. And I'm like, "But we're at the football, it's what we do." And I got away with about 2, and at that point it was game over. And I got a clip round the ear, and she said, "You do that again, then you know it's supposed to be your birthday treat." And I'm like, "Well, that didn't feel like a birthday treat, Mum, if I'm honest." But there you go. Family friendly. It's not the end of the world, is it? It's not. There should be a section for that. But equally, there should be away ends. That's the whole point of the away ends, is that you get your tribalism and you get the ability. And then guess what people have? Choice. Oh, where would I like to sit today? Shall I sit with all the crazy people that are going to shout at all the players? Or shall I sit with the nice people that have come in with their cheese sandwiches and their flask of tea and they brought on a little pop for the kids? Do I want to go and say, and make the decision? Let them make that choice, because that's what football should be, surely, is just choice. I'm not qualified enough to talk about femininity, so I'm not even going to mention that. But what I will say is that you are asking for people, not you, the world is asking for more people, and those people are going to come. There's going to be a section of them that are going to come from the men's game. And all I'm going to say to you as we talk about these things that go from the men's game into the women's, these are the same men's game that nearly got the European Championship final at Wembley gone because they didn't even want to pay for the tickets. Like, that's your toxic element, and that's what you need to be careful of. So when you want people coming in for women's football, you want people coming into women's football because they genuinely care. And that's why I don't argue with men online. What's the point? Why am I allowing that to get... I went through a period. I'm going to be the keyboard warrior. I'm going to stand up for the girls. You shouldn't be talking like this. You're not going to change their mind. They're mental. Why are you doing it? Like, I'm not going to send anything to Joey Barton. He doesn't care what I'm going to say. He's an absolute tool. Why are you listening to him? Why? Like, you are just wasting your life. Concentrate on the things that matter. Make football great by turning up and supporting your team, your player, and just live your life. Like, don't get so up about the things that... Worry about whether or not Katie McCabe should have had a second yellow card. Worry about whether or not anybody is ever going to take the title off of Chelsea. Worry about whether poor Julie is ever going to get a team in Minnesota that she can go and watch, so she hasn't got to travel across the other side of the bloody country just to go and watch that. Worry about things you can control. The game will grow. It will grow by 50 years behind. It may not grow in our lifetime, guys, to the level that we want it to get to. But I'll tell you what, it will get there. Why? Because the people that are playing it for the right reasons. And the people that are involved in it for the right reasons. So we just need to enjoy it. And if we do that, the right people will come. They'll be attracted by that. That's what you need. But you start putting the wrong people in the wrong places. This is where you start talking about people like Jonas. If you're having these arguments about how he's treating players, that's where your issue is going to come in. You can't have that in the game and be attracting the right people in. But you've got the right people in the places. Oh my God, it'll be amazing. Here endeth the lesson. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
I was getting scared that I wasn't going to hit the hour mark, but I had nothing to fear. And Connor is feeling slightly targeted after joining at slightly the wrong moment in the middle of that. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how to follow that up, to be honest, but I'll try. I guess, and maybe this question is going to come at completely the wrong time now, but I think to round up like that particular discussion, I think maybe there's an extent to which we do, and I think I've lost track of the comments because there's been so many, so appreciate everyone's kind of input tonight. But I think Sean mentioned kind of just narrowing the focus and never being able to achieve this kind of perfection, as Barry also said in the women's game. Do we think there's a point, and anyone can jump in on this one, just to wrap up this kind of section, but do we kind of feel like there's a point at which women's football, because it's in this developmental stage, but also with the kind of social media platforms around it, it is just almost overanalyzed, where we're picking apart every little part of its development and not necessarily just letting it grow organically, and maybe in putting fears on it that aren't actually that, like, will it ever actually lose the incredible inclusivity that's developed? Because actually this does feel pretty rooted in the game now, and maybe that's so embedded, but we're creating these fears and this discourse around out of nothing. Does anyone kind of feel that maybe there is this element of overanalyzing?
I think I'll jump in here first, if that's okay. I think, and I'm sorry to be so like serious, but there's some really massive issues at the moment, especially in England, I think, with like sexism, misogyny, violence against women. And I think that that's a massive issue, like across the board. So I think in order for us to see like the positive change that we want to see in sport and in football, we need to see that change more generally. And that's where I think, like, yes, raise concerns about what's going on in women's football 100%, but it's almost like sometimes a little bit too closed-minded, and instead of thinking like, what's the wider issue here, what's the root cause, it's just like, let's pinpoint this one issue in women's football. But in doing that, you're never going to solve it if you're not looking at the bigger picture, and you're not looking at why whatever this issue is or isn't happening, then nothing changes. So I think in that sense there can be overanalysis, and I think that also comes down to the like this need to just infantilize women's football fans, where they're not allowed to criticize. Like, I don't often see us telling men's football fans that they can't criticize one of their players or they can't criticize their manager. So I think it comes down to that as well, and almost that like, oh, we need to protect the players. Yes, we 100% do, but sometimes it feels like we're protecting them from the wrong things. I don't think we need to be protecting them from fan criticism. We need to be protecting them from actual like abuse and all of these other awful things that seem to be going on everywhere in the world at the moment. So I think it's almost like there just needs to be a big step taken back and look at what we can do to deal with, because we can't deal with the smaller issues without kind of looking at the bigger picture, if that makes sense. But yeah, sorry to get on my soapbox there.
No, that makes complete sense. That's, yeah, absolutely right. And I guess it leads us on almost perfectly to the next point, which is to kind of discuss, obviously, the Netflix documentary that's come out recently about the Spanish women's national team, and the fact that there are issues like this in women's football, and they are almost systemic to a point, that there is these kind of embedded issues, misogyny in the game that persist, and yet most of the discourse that seems to be going on is about, like, can someone hold up a P45 to Jonas Eidevall? And it's just that kind of disconnect, which is exactly what you said. So I guess we've seen this Netflix documentary that's been released, which is great to hear that story. There's obviously various criticisms, as with any documentary, and we can maybe touch on some of them. But I guess, yeah, anyone have any key takeaways from the documentary, either from reading summaries, I know it's only been out fairly recently, or from having watched it, just how important it is that we still have this kind of discourse around those incidents and keeping that in the current and present, because we still need to make sure we're addressing those issues. But also, if there was anything in particular that stood out to you from that. Again, anyone feel free to jump in on this one. I think in the comments we've got JJ saying calling Spanish players brats and hearing other team being described as someone with a face like, yeah, exactly. I think that was pretty appalling in the commentary. And yeah, Sean, I was going to come on to this, but I think this is a really important point that Jorge Vilda is still in the women's game and we've still got these issues and he's still managing Morocco. And hearing some of the things that came out of that documentary, I think the amount of control he had over players in wanting to know their movements at all times, it just feels so scary. And Michael pointing out that it kind of all starts at the top, and as long as FIFA is corrupt and keeps accepting, I think there is definitely so many really big issues. Generally, then, what's like the importance? Sorry,
I was hoping. The reason I waited was I was wondering if Julia was going to say anything because I've already said a lot. So I'm being polite and not just trying to jump in. But this is exactly what I was trying to mention about having the right people in the right places. Like it's crazy to me that this is the situation we're in at the moment. That you can have the guy literally sexually assault a woman on the football pitch and then try and claim, oh no, it was absolutely fine, and try and force the woman into just going, yeah, that was exactly, it was fine. No, you didn't. Like, you literally chose to do that and felt like you were perfectly within your rights to do it. And the whole thing just blew the lid off of what is just an atrocious area. We've spoken about the WSL. You start looking at it from the European points of view, it's very clear how women's football is viewed by people within Europe when they're allowing the Ballon d'Or to go on during the women's international windows. They can't even turn up to go and celebrate the things that they've won. Like, they can't even be there because they've got to go and play international football. You would never even dream of having such a thing, of allowing the men to be playing their international football whilst the awards ceremony is going on. It's mad. That's what they need to sort out. You've absolutely got to. And this is what Beth's saying. And I can't agree with it anymore. That's why I'm giving it the exaggerated nods. Because, like, these are the problems that women's football are going to need to overcome. And this is where you need sensible men to come in and start having those discussions to start changing it. And if you just allow the floodgates for the absolute morons to get themselves into it, you're never going to get that, because they will be the loudest voice in the room. And the minute they become the loudest voice in the room, what happens? Well, the way that you guys were talking about not being able to go to a football match and feel comfortable, that's what's going to start coming into the women's game. If it's allowed for people to come into the game that are not there because they love the game of football and they think that it should be a game that's accessible to all. I work in a primary school, and it just fills my heart with joy anytime I see the girls wanting to play football. We had last year, for the first time ever, a group of girls that would choose to play football above any other game at lunches and break times, to the point where we'd move up as a little gang. I'd come in with them and we'd kick the boys off the pitch. We're like, no, we're having it today. You can just go and play somewhere else, go and play basketball or something. And I used to love, like, watching how upset that got them, because I wanted them to realise football's not just your game. It's not just yours. You might be the guy that can run about and push people off the ball, but you're not going to do that here. You're not going to do that. You're not going to stop these people from having the same accessibility that I had to be able to enjoy the game of football. I'm not Ronaldo. I wasn't very good. The very first team I went to, they told me, you might want to come back next year when you've learned how to play. The first time I played for the school, I was frozen. I just stood there with my hands in my shorts going, oh, this is freezing. Why am I doing this? And I never got picked again, unbelievably. So, that's not the situation I was in, but I grew up loving the game. And that's what we should be doing. So those are the big things to worry about. And that's why I say don't worry about who's loving a certain player. Don't worry about whether or not you've got a family-friendly thing. Worry about this. How are you going to keep that out of the game, and how are you going to address it so that people start behaving correctly? Because that's what needs changing. It was only the 90s when you had magazines like Nuts and Zoo and all of those sorts of things. And those magazines had just a completely different depiction of what women were for. And that's what you're overcoming. That's not that long ago. That generation of man is still going through football and they are really, really, really going to be hard to get into, because the older you get, the harder it is to change your ways. Like, we've all had that nan or granddad that would say the inappropriate thing. They're like, well, I can't change now, can I? I'm 70. I've done this for 70 years. But that's going to carry on unless we get the people to start changing the discourse correctly. That is what we need to worry about. And that's why Beth is an absolute legend.
Yeah, I don't want to say I'm glad that we're talking about this, because obviously, like, the Spanish women shouldn't have had to go through this. Well, it wouldn't have happened. Things wouldn't have gotten worse and then improved if they hadn't have won the World Cup. That shouldn't need to happen. They should just be treated correctly. But it's taking away. It's taking away from the enjoyment of the game. Because I remember going into this last World Cup going, I don't think I want Spain to win, because then it feels like the players that originally were boycotting the team, that they've gone even the worse. They're even worse off. Also, it's just, I didn't think that then Vilda would go, or there would be any change. It took away from their win. There were so many things that, like, why did we need to get into this to this point? Like, the Jamaican woman. Oh, I see someone just mentioned them. Like, the Jamaican women shouldn't have had to need the crowd source their funding to go to the World Cup. Like, those are the conversations that we need to be talking about. Why is the Zambia coach still in charge? Why was he still at the World Cup? Like, I'm not saying that Canada was, what they did with the drone was okay, but the fact that got so much coverage, and the Zambia coach, who is still there and has been in this investigation for so long, why are we not talking about that? Like, that is where our focus should be. It shouldn't be on, which fans are okay to come. Let's define very minutely what fan culture is. We have much bigger fish to fry, and, like, we shouldn't need documentaries like this to make changes. It shouldn't have taken literally the world telling Rubiales that he needed to leave for that change to happen. Like, it's just, it's mind boggling that this is still the point we're at, and the fact that this isn't the primary story in what's wrong with women's football is disturbing on so many levels.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry.
I think no. I think it's almost a perfect point to kind of round it off with the kind of the fact that we do all need to reflect on maybe what we see, because I think there's validity in both. Kind of women's football for many people can also be an escape, and I think we can't forget that as well, because it is important that we can go on a Sunday and watch the WSL, watch our team and enjoy that. But away from that, when we come back as journalists on this channel, or fans who want to advocate for the rights of players, for the rights of fans, that we do have that in mind, that there are so many really deep issues. And when we're like cooking up a tweet about another fan that might have followed a player for a bit too long, maybe take the broader perspective. Not that we can't have those conversations as well, they have their place, but absolutely, I think there's been some really, really important points made tonight about where maybe the bigger issues lie, and hopefully there's been consensus in the comments as well, which I've picked up on. So thanks everyone for kind of giving your opinion and discussing this so respectfully in many ways, because the comments have been. So thank you for that. I guess to round us off then, we'll do our little spin around of where we can find everyone. So Beth, where can we find you on social media, etc.?
So you can find me on Twitter. My handle is there. Writing for The Halfway Line, Her Football Hub, and the Sports Gazette. So yeah, everything will be on my Twitter. Brilliant. And Julia, how about you?
Very similar. You can find mirroring is hard on computers. On Twitter, just looking for something full time, but freelancing currently. So anything I write will be posted on Twitter or Muck Rack.
Brilliant. That's brilliant. And Barry, anything to shout out from you?
don't come and try and find me. Why? I put nothing out on Twitter. I've just told you, like, but generally I would say that and mean it. But actually, there is something that I have been doing quite a lot. And every week I write a preview before the Stevenage women football matches, and I spend hours on these. Like, genuinely, I'm really trying to change the visibility of the lower leagues at the moment and try and get them some of the attention that you would see higher up as well. We're a tier 5 side, like I said before, and the time that I spend doing that is because I want them to, like, just again normalizing conversations. This person's had their 50th appearance. It's little things like that. It took me a long time on the FA Cup one because I was researching all the way back to 2005. Yes, we are. Make sure you tune in on Wednesday because Barry going to be talking about Stevenage for the first time. But genuinely, if you do want to, I'm here. I often retweet it, but if not, go and follow the Stevenage FCW at Stevenage FCW account. A lot of the stuff that I write, whether it be reports or stuff, gets put out on there, and it would be great to have some people just having a look and just throwing a like or a retweet or throwing those things out so that more people can try and get eyes on it. Because not because I want any credit, because I don't, otherwise I put my name to it, but because I want more people to see that this is possible. Do that stuff. And again, this is how we elevate the game, by getting people that are passionate to do these sorts of things. So and anyone can do it. You haven't got to be a wordsmith like us. You know, Connor wasn't a wordsmith, and look at him now. So it's very doable.
No, thank you. Yeah, it's super important, obviously, to this channel to be championing and things like that. So absolutely check out that from Barry and the Lower League Lingo on Wednesday for some lower league info. But until then, we will leave you and love you. So thank you for listening tonight. Thank you for all your comments. And Barry will see you on Wednesday.